I discovered the violation notice taped to my front door on a Tuesday morning in late March, written in bold red letters like some kind of parking ticket from hell. And my blood immediately started boiling because I knew exactly what this was about before I even unfolded the paper. The letter was from the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association in Gilbert, Arizona, signed by Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, who had made it her personal mission to turn our peaceful subdivision into her own little kingdom. The notice stated that my 6-foot wooden privacy fence violated community guidelines because it exceeded the maximum allowable height of 5 feet 6 inches, and I was being fined $250 with an additional $50 per day until the issue was corrected. I stood there on my porch, reading and rereading the words, feeling my jaw clench tighter with each pass. The fence had been up for 3 months. I had spent weeks researching the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions before installing it. I measured everything twice, consulted with the contractor, and made absolutely certain that my fence complied with every single rule in the books. It was exactly 6 feet tall, which was the maximum height allowed for backyard privacy fences, according to Section 7.3 of the HOA guidelines I had downloaded from the community website. Front yard fences had different requirements, sure, but this was my backyard fence, running along the property line I shared with my neighbor, and it was completely legal. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office immediately. The receptionist, a woman named Linda who always sounded exhausted, answered after 4 rings. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, this is Linda speaking. Linda, this is Ryan Young from 42 Cedar Ridge Drive. I just got a violation notice about my fence, and there has to be some mistake. I heard her typing on a keyboard. Let me pull up your file. Okay, yes, I see the notice here. Your fence is listed as being 6 inches over the approved height. That is not correct, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The HOA guidelines clearly state that backyard privacy fences can be up to 6 feet tall. My fence is exactly 6 feet. I measured it myself during installation. More typing. Well, according to the notes here, Mrs. Hendricks personally measured your fence last Friday and found it to be 6 feet 6 inches at multiple points along the line. That is completely impossible. I was there when they installed it. Every single post and panel is 6 feet exactly. Linda sighed. I understand your frustration, Mr. Young, but if you want to dispute the violation, you will need to submit a written appeal to the board and attend the next HOA meeting. That is scheduled for 2 weeks from Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community center. 2 weeks. The fine increases every day. That is going to cost me hundreds of dollars while I wait for a meeting. I am sorry, but that is the procedure. You can also choose to simply correct the violation, and the daily fines will stop immediately. I wanted to throw my phone across the yard. I am not correcting anything because there is nothing to correct. My fence is perfectly within code. Then I suggest you prepare your appeal for the meeting, Linda said, her tone suggesting she had been through this exact conversation many times before. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up without answering and immediately went to my garage to grab my tape measure. The morning sun was already heating up the Arizona desert air as I walked around my backyard, measuring every single section of the fence. The contractor had done excellent work. Each panel was exactly 72 inches from the ground to the top of the fence. 6 feet. Not 6 feet 6 inches. Not even 6 feet 1 inch. Exactly 6 feet. My neighbor, Tom Chen, came out his back door while I was measuring the section along our shared property line. Tom was a software engineer in his early 40s who worked from home and had become a good friend since I moved to Meadowbrook Estates 2 years ago. "Hey Ryan, what are you doing?" He called over the fence. I held up the violation notice. "The HOA claims my fence is 6 inches too tall." Tom walked over to his side of the fence and looked at it critically. "That is ridiculous. I was here when they installed it, remember? We measured it together to make sure it matched up with the height you wanted. Apparently, Patricia Hendricks measured it herself and says it is 6'6". "Patricia," Tom said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Let me guess. She wants you to either pay a bunch of fines or tear it down and rebuild it shorter." "Basically, yes. I have to appeal at the next board meeting, but that is not for 2 weeks." Tom shook his head. "She has been doing this to people all over the neighborhood. Did you hear about the Martins on Willow Street? She fined them for having the wrong shade of beige on their house. The wrong shade of beige. They had to repaint their entire house because it was apparently too yellow. How is that even legal? It is not about legal, man. It is about control." Patricia retired from her job as a middle school principal 3 years ago and apparently decided that running the HOA like a prison camp was going to be her new hobby. Tom glanced back at his house, then lowered his voice. "Look, my advice. Get a professional surveyor out here to document everything. Do not go into that meeting with just your tape measure and your word against hers. Get someone licensed who can provide an official report." That was actually brilliant advice. "You know anyone?" "Yeah, actually. My cousin Derek is a land surveyor. Works for a company called Precision Land Surveys here in Gilbert. Want me to text you his number?" "That would be amazing." Tom pulled out his phone and sent me the contact information right there. I thanked him and immediately called Derek Chen. He answered on the second ring, and after I explained the situation, he agreed to come out the next morning to do a full property survey including precise measurements of my fence. His fee was $600, which made me wince, but it was better than paying daily fines indefinitely or spending thousands to rebuild a fence that did not need rebuilding. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a beer and my laptop and started drafting my written appeal. I printed out the relevant sections of the HOA covenants that clearly stated backyard privacy fences could be up to 6 feet in height. I included photographs of my fence from multiple angles. I described the installation process and the care I had taken to ensure compliance. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I had a 5-page document with exhibits that looked like something I might file in court. Derek Chen arrived at 8:30 the next morning in a white truck with Precision Land Surveys printed on the side. He was in his mid-30s, wearing cargo pants and a polo shirt with the company logo, and he brought enough equipment to survey a small city. He set up a theodolite, a laser level, and several other instruments I could not name. "Your cousin told me you are thorough, but this is impressive," I said as I watched him work. Derek grinned. "When you are challenging an HOA, you want documentation that could hold up in actual court if it comes to that. I am going to measure your fence height at 20 different points, document the exact positioning relative to your property lines, and create a full report with photographs and technical specifications. If your fence is within code, there will be no doubt about it when I am done." He spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and documenting everything. I watched him work, and I could see the precision in every movement. He measured from the ground level at each point, accounting for any minor variations in the soil. He used the laser level to verify that his measurements were exact. He documented everything in a tablet, creating a digital record with GPS coordinates for each measurement point. When he finished, Derek sat down with me on my back patio and showed me the preliminary results on his tablet. "Okay, so here is what I found," he said, scrolling through screens of data. Your fence is installed at exactly 72 inches in height at every measurement point, with a variation of less than 1/8 of an inch due to natural settling. That is 6 feet exactly. The property line placement is also perfect. You are actually about 3 inches inside your property line on the neighbor's side, which means you gave yourself a buffer. Whoever installed this fence knew what they were doing. Relief washed over me. So there is absolutely no violation. None whatsoever. Based on the HOA documents you sent me last night, your fence is in perfect compliance. I will have the full written report ready for you by tomorrow afternoon, complete with all the technical data, photographs, and my professional certification. This will cost whoever claimed your fence is too tall a lot of credibility. Patricia Hendricks is not going to be happy. Derek smiled. HOA presidents rarely are when they get proven wrong, but you will have documentation that is legally defensible. If she continues to push this after seeing my report, you would have grounds for a harassment complaint or even a lawsuit for abuse of authority. After Derek left, I felt significantly better about the situation. I spent the rest of the day working from my home office. I was a project manager for a construction company, and normally I could focus on work without any problem. But that day I kept thinking about the upcoming HOA meeting and what Patricia's reaction would be when I presented Derek's survey. The next afternoon, Derek emailed me the completed report. It was a 23-page document that looked like something NASA might produce. Every measurement was documented with photographs. The methodology was explained in detail. There were diagrams showing the fence position relative to property lines and elevation changes. At the end, Derek's professional certification stated unequivocally that the fence was exactly 6 feet tall and in full compliance with all stated HOA requirements. I printed 5 copies of the report, one for me and one for each of the 4 HOA board members. Then I emailed my written appeal along with a PDF of the survey to the HOA office, making sure to copy all the board members on the email. I got an automated response from Linda confirming receipt, but nothing from any of the board members. 3 days before the meeting, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice that could have cut glass spoke without introduction. "Mr. Young, this is Patricia Hendricks. I received your appeal regarding the fence violation." "Good," I said. "Then you have seen the professional survey that confirms my fence is exactly 6 feet tall and fully compliant with HOA regulations." "I have seen a report from a surveyor, yes. However, I have concerns about the methodology and the measurements. I measured your fence myself with a standard tape measure, and I consistently found it to be 6 feet 6 inches. I felt my temper rising but kept my voice calm. "Mrs. Hendricks, with all due respect, a professional licensed surveyor using calibrated equipment is going to be more accurate than a tape measure. The report shows measurements from 20 different points along the fence, all confirming 6 feet exactly. I have been measuring fences in this community for 15 years, Mr. Young. I know how to use a tape measure. I am not questioning your ability to use a tape measure. I am saying that the professional survey proves definitively that my fence meets code requirements. There is no violation." There was a long pause. "We will discuss this at the board meeting. I suggest you be prepared to answer questions about your contractor and the installation process." "I will be there," I said, "with copies of the survey for every board member." She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there holding my phone, shaking my head. Tom had been right. This was not about the fence at all. This was about control and authority. The next few days dragged by slowly. I kept checking the mailbox for more violation notices or additional fines, but nothing came. I asked Tom if he would come to the meeting with me as a witness since he had been present during the installation, and he readily agreed. "I would not miss this for anything," he said. "I have wanted to see someone stand up to Patricia for years. Most people just cave and do whatever she says because it is easier than fighting. Well, I am not most people. If I am right, I am not backing down." The night of the HOA meeting finally arrived. The Meadowbrook Estates Community Center was a beige stucco building near the neighborhood entrance that also housed a small gym and a pool. The meeting room was set up with about 40 folding chairs facing a long table where the 5 board members sat. Patricia Hendricks occupied the center seat, a woman in her late 50s with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that suggested she had been asking to speak to managers for decades. She wore a blazer over a blouse and had reading glasses on a chain around her neck. The other board members were Donald Murphy, an elderly retired accountant who served as treasurer, Susan Walsh, a middle-aged woman who was the secretary, Greg Patterson, a man in his 40s who worked in real estate, and Jennifer Soto, a younger woman who seemed perpetually uncomfortable with the whole process. About 25 homeowners were scattered through the chairs. I recognized several of them from neighborhood events. Tom sat next to me in the 3rd row, and I had a folder with all my documentation on my lap. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. and worked through the standard agenda items for the first 30 minutes. Budget reports, upcoming community events, a discussion about pool maintenance schedules. Everything was conducted with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, and Patricia clearly ran the meeting with an iron fist. Nobody spoke without being called on, and she cut off anyone who went over their allotted time. Finally, she reached the agenda item I had been waiting for. Next, we have an appeal from Ryan Young at 42 Cedar Ridge Drive regarding a fence height violation. "Mr. Young, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I handed a copy of the survey report to each board member and kept one for myself. "Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks, board members. As you can see from the documentation I have provided, I hired Precision Land Surveys to conduct a professional survey of my property and fence. The surveyor, Derek Chen, is a licensed professional with 15 years of experience. He measured my fence at 20 different points using calibrated equipment and found it to be exactly 6 feet tall at every measurement location. According to Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants, backyard privacy fences are allowed to be up to 6 feet in height. My fence is therefore in perfect compliance with all regulations. I respectfully request that the violation notice be withdrawn and all fines be waived." Patricia was already shaking her head before I finished talking. "Mr. Young, I personally measured your fence on March 22nd and found it to be 6 feet 6 inches at multiple locations. I used a standard tape measure that I have used for years in conducting HOA inspections. Mrs. Hendricks, with respect, a tape measure held by hand is not as accurate as professional surveying equipment. The report includes detailed methodology and photographs. The measurements are GPS tagged and legally certified. This is not a matter of opinion. The fence is 6 feet tall." Donald Murphy, the treasurer, was flipping through the survey report with increasing interest. "This is quite thorough," he said. "I have seen professional surveys before, and this appears to be legitimate. These measurements are very precise." "The measurements are also very convenient," Patricia said sharply. "Mr. Young hired and paid for this survey. Of course it says what he wants it to say." I felt my face flush. "Are you suggesting that a licensed surveyor falsified an official report?" "Because that would be a serious accusation that could cost him his license and career." I am suggesting that measurements can be interpreted in different ways. There is no interpretation here, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The fence is 72 inches tall. That is 6 feet. The report shows this conclusively. Susan Walsh, the secretary, raised her hand tentatively. Patricia, do we have any documentation of your measurements, photographs or written records? Patricia looked annoyed. I took notes at the time of inspection and recorded my findings in the violation notice. The fence was 6 feet 6 inches. But do we have photographs or any objective evidence besides your notes? Susan pressed. My measurements are objective evidence. I have been conducting these inspections for 15 years. Greg Patterson leaned back in his chair. Look, I am not trying to cause problems here, but this survey report is pretty convincing. If a licensed professional says the fence is 6 feet and our rules allow 6 feet, then I do not see how we can uphold the violation. The violation stands because I measured it myself and found it to be too tall, Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. I am not going to have homeowners questioning my authority every time they disagree with a violation notice. This is not about authority, I said. This is about facts. The facts show my fence is compliant. Jennifer Soto, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke up. I think we should have someone else measure the fence. An independent third party. If there is this much disagreement, we need to settle it definitively. I am not going to waste HOA resources hiring a surveyor when I have already done the inspection myself, Patricia snapped. Mr. Young already hired a surveyor, Jennifer pointed out, at his own expense, and the report shows compliance. I think we need to accept that. Patricia's face was turning red. I am the president of this board, and I conducted the inspection according to standard procedures. My measurement stands. Donald Murphy cleared his throat. Patricia, I think we need to vote on this. Mr. Young has provided substantial evidence that his fence is compliant. If we continue to fine him despite this evidence, we could be opening the HOA up to a lawsuit for harassment or abuse of authority. There will be no lawsuit because there is no abuse, Patricia said. The violation is legitimate. Then let us vote, Donald said firmly. I move that we withdraw the violation notice and waive all fines based on the evidence presented in the professional survey. I second that motion, Jennifer said immediately. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. We do not need a vote. As president, I have the authority to make enforcement decisions. Actually, any board decision can be brought to a vote if 2 members request it, Donald said, tapping the HOA bylaws that sat in front of him. And we have a motion and a second. All in favor of withdrawing the violation and waiving the fines. Donald, Jennifer, and Greg all raised their hands. Susan hesitated, looking nervously at Patricia, but finally raised her hand as well. All opposed, Donald continued. Only Patricia's hand went up. The motion carries 4-1, Donald announced. The violation is withdrawn and all fines are waived. Mr. Young, your fence is in compliance. This matter is closed. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This meeting is adjourned, she said coldly and walked out of the room without another word. The other board members looked at each other awkwardly. Susan Walsh finally said, we actually have 2 more agenda items. Should we continue without her? Greg asked. Donald nodded. We have quorum. Let us finish the meeting. They worked through the remaining items quickly, both of which were routine maintenance issues, and then officially adjourned the meeting at 8:15. Several homeowners came up to me afterward to congratulate me or ask about the surveyor I had used. Apparently, I was not the only one who had been on the receiving end of questionable violation notices from Patricia. Tom clapped me on the shoulder as we walked out to the parking lot. That was beautiful. Did you see her face when they voted against her? I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Do not. She has been doing this to people for years. It is about time someone stood up to her with actual evidence. I drove home feeling vindicated but also a little uneasy. Patricia Hendricks did not seem like the type of person who would let this go easily, and I had just embarrassed her in front of the entire board and a room full of homeowners. My instincts turned out to be correct. 2 weeks later, I got another violation notice in the mail. This one claimed that my fence was not properly stained and that the wood finish did not match the approved color palette for neighborhood fences. The fine was $300. I stood in my driveway staring at the notice in disbelief. The fence was natural cedar that had been sealed with a clear weatherproofing sealant, the same treatment that at least a dozen other fences in the neighborhood had. I walked around my block that evening and counted 15 fences that looked exactly like mine. The next morning, I took photographs of every similar fence I could find and filed another appeal. I also sent an email to all the board members explaining that I believed I was being targeted for harassment after successfully appealing the previous violation. Donald Murphy called me that afternoon. "Ryan, I want you to know that the rest of the board is aware of what is happening here. This second violation was filed by Patricia without consulting any of us. We are calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow night to discuss it." "I appreciate that, Donald. This is getting ridiculous." "I know. And between you and me, you are not the only one she has been targeting. We have had 3 other homeowners file harassment complaints in the past month alone. The board is starting to take this seriously." The emergency meeting was held on a Thursday evening. This time, Patricia did not show up at all. Susan Walsh read a prepared statement explaining that Patricia had been asked to recuse herself from any further involvement with my property due to a potential conflict of interest and bias. The board voted unanimously to withdraw the second violation and issue me a formal apology for the harassment. They also announced that they would be reviewing all violation notices issued by Patricia over the past year to identify any other potential cases of bias or abuse of authority. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home from work to find that someone had spray painted the word "Rebel" across my fence in bright red paint. I immediately called the Gilbert Police Department to file a vandalism report. Officer Michael Torres arrived within 30 minutes and took photographs and a statement. "You have any idea who might have done this?" he asked. I hesitated. I had suspicions, but I could not prove anything. "I have been having a dispute with my HOA president. She has been filing false violation notices against me, and the board recently voted against her twice and told her to stop targeting my property." Officer Torres wrote that down. "What is her name?" "Patricia Hendricks. She lives over on Maple Court, number 18. "And you think she might have vandalized your fence?" "I do not know, but the timing is suspicious, and someone clearly is not happy with me standing up to the HOA. Do you have any security cameras?" "No, but I am going to install some now." Officer Torres gave me a case number and said they would investigate. He also suggested I contact my insurance company about the damage and consider installing cameras as a deterrent against future incidents. I spent that weekend cleaning the paint off my fence, which required sanding and refinishing several panels. It took 2 full days of work and cost me $300 in materials. I also had a security camera system installed that covered my front yard, backyard, and both sides of the house. The installation cost another $800, but at that point, I was not taking any chances. For about a month, things were quiet. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had been taking a lot of heat at board meetings, and that several homeowners had filed formal complaints about her conduct. Tom told me that there was talk of calling a special election to remove her from the board, but that it would require a petition signed by at least 30% of homeowners in the community. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early June, I woke up to find that someone had cut down 3 of my fence panels during the night. Just cut them right off at the posts with what must have been a reciprocating saw, leaving jagged edges and 3 gaping holes in my fence. The damaged panels were lying in my backyard. This time I did not hesitate. I reviewed the security camera footage immediately, and there she was. Patricia Hendricks, clear as day, arriving at my house at 2:30 in the morning wearing dark clothing and gloves, carrying a cordless reciprocating saw. The footage showed her cutting down the 3 fence panels over the course of about 20 minutes, then loading them into the bed of her pickup truck and driving away. I called Officer Torres directly. He arrived with another officer within 15 minutes, and I showed them the footage. They watched it 3 times, confirming the identification and the timeline. "That is pretty clear-cut vandalism," Officer Torres said. "We will need to make an arrest. Can you email me a copy of this footage?" "Absolutely. You need anything else from me?" "We will probably need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement and sign a complaint. But first, we are going to go have a conversation with Mrs. Hendricks." I watched the police officers drive away, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had not wanted things to escalate this far, but Patricia had left me no choice. Later that afternoon, Tom came over and knocked on my door. "Dude, did you hear what happened? I heard the police arrested Patricia this morning. I was the one who called them." Tom's eyes widened. "You have evidence?" "Security camera footage of her cutting down my fence panels at 2:30 in the morning. Clear as day." "Holy shit. This is all over the neighborhood Facebook page. People are losing their minds." Over the next few days, the full story came out. Patricia had been charged with criminal trespassing and criminal damage, both misdemeanors under Arizona law. She had posted bail and was scheduled to appear in court later that month. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president and as a member of the board entirely. Susan Walsh was appointed interim president until a special election could be held. I had to repair my fence again, which cost another $500, but this time I filed the costs as part of a restitution request through the criminal case. The police also discovered that Patricia had saved the fence panels she cut down, apparently intending to use them as evidence that I had removed them myself to frame her. The fact that they were found in her garage with her saw and gloves pretty much destroyed that defense. The criminal case moved through the court system faster than I expected. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in offering anything too lenient because the security camera footage made the case completely airtight. The fact that Patricia had been targeting me through abuse of her HOA authority, followed by vandalism, followed by property destruction, painted a picture of escalating harassment that the court took seriously. In late July, Patricia appeared before Judge Thomas Ramirez in Gilbert Municipal Court. I was there to testify and to provide victim impact testimony during sentencing. The courtroom was small and mostly empty except for me, Tom, who came for moral support, Patricia and her attorney, the prosecutor, and a few other people I did not recognize. The prosecutor laid out the case efficiently. Security camera footage showing Patricia cutting down my fence panels, evidence of prior harassment through false HOA violations, documentation of the spray paint vandalism that could not be directly proven but fit the pattern of behavior, the cost of repairs, and the emotional distress caused by months of targeted harassment. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that his client had been under significant stress, that she had devoted years of volunteer service to the community, and that this was an aberration in an otherwise law-abiding life. He requested probation and community service. The prosecutor pushed back, arguing that Patricia had abused a position of authority to target a homeowner who had dared to challenge her, and that when legal methods failed, she had escalated to criminal behavior. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained campaign of harassment that culminated in property destruction. Judge Ramirez listened to everything, reviewed the evidence, and then asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood up and faced Patricia directly. "Mrs. Hendricks, I moved to Meadowbrook Estates because it seemed like a nice, quiet community. I followed every rule when I installed my fence. I measured carefully, I hired professionals, I did everything right. When you falsely accused me of violating HOA regulations, I proved my compliance with a professional survey. Instead of accepting that you were wrong, you doubled down. You filed false violations, you harassed me, and then you vandalized my property twice. You cost me thousands of dollars in repairs and security measures. You cost me sleep and peace of mind. And for what? Because I stood up to you at a meeting. Because I would not just accept your word over documented evidence. I do not want revenge. I just want to live in my house with my legal fence without being targeted by someone who is supposed to be serving the community." Patricia stared at her hands the whole time I spoke. When I finished, Judge Ramirez asked her if she had anything to say. She stood up, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize, but instead she just said, "I believed I was enforcing the community standards that I swore to uphold." Judge Ramirez was not impressed. He sentenced Patricia to 90 days in jail, suspended pending successful completion of 1 year of probation. She was ordered to pay full restitution for all damage caused, including the cost of the fence repairs and the security camera system, totaling over $2,000. She was also ordered to complete 100 hours of community service and to attend anger management counseling. Additionally, the judge issued a restraining order prohibiting Patricia from coming within 100 feet of my property or contacting me in any way. As we left the courthouse, Tom shook his head in amazement. "I cannot believe it actually got this far. She went to court over a fence." "She went to court because she committed crimes," I corrected. "The fence was just the beginning." "True. But still, man, this whole thing is crazy." Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal after that. Susan Walsh turned out to be a much more reasonable HOA president than Patricia had been. She implemented new policies requiring board approval for any violation notices over a certain dollar amount, and she established an independent review process for disputed violations. Several homeowners who had been targeted by Patricia came forward with their own stories, and the board issued apologies and refunds to at least 6 families. The special election for a permanent HOA board was held in September. Susan won the presidency in a landslide, and 2 new board members were elected who were committed to running the HOA in a more fair and transparent manner. I even considered running for the board myself, but ultimately decided I had had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime. Patricia completed her probation without incident, as far as I know. I never saw her again after the court hearing, and I heard through the grapevine that she had sold her house and moved to a different part of the Phoenix metropolitan area. Good riddance, as far as I was concerned. My fence stood exactly 6 feet tall, completely within code requirements, and never generated another violation notice. I had learned an expensive lesson about the importance of documentation, the value of standing up for yourself when you are right, and the dangers of giving petty tyrants even a small amount of power. About a year after the whole incident ended, I was having a beer on my back patio with Tom, enjoying a cool evening in late October when Arizona finally started to feel less like a blast furnace. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just paid the first fine and cut down the fence?" Tom asked. I had thought about it, actually. I think she would have just found something else to target. People like Patricia do not stop when you give in. They escalate because they learn they can. True. Still, man, you went through a lot. Was it worth it? I looked at my fence, standing exactly 6 feet tall, the cedar weathered to a nice silver-gray patina, completely legal and completely mine. "Yeah," I said, "it was worth it." Tom raised his beer. "To standing your ground." I clinked my bottle against his. "To standing your ground." The neighborhood had changed in subtle ways since the whole ordeal. People were more willing to question HOA decisions now, more willing to ask for documentation and evidence before complying with violation notices. The board meetings were better attended, and homeowners were more engaged in the governance of their own community. In a weird way, my fight with Patricia had made Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. I still got occasional questions from neighbors about the situation. New residents who heard the story secondhand would stop me on walks and ask if it was true that the HOA president had been arrested for cutting down someone's fence. I always confirmed it was true and used it as an opportunity to remind people to document everything and know their rights. The security cameras I had installed proved to be a good investment beyond just catching Patricia. They captured a package thief a few months later, and the footage helped the police catch the person who had been breaking into cars around the neighborhood. Several of my neighbors installed their own camera systems after seeing how useful mine had been. One afternoon in December, I got a call from Derek Chen, the surveyor who had done the original property assessment. We had stayed in touch occasionally, and he had referred me to several other homeowners who needed surveying work for their own HOA disputes. "Ryan, I wanted to let you know something interesting," Derek said. "Remember how I told you that survey reports should hold up in court if necessary?" "Yeah. Well, I just testified in another HOA case over in Chandler. Similar situation, homeowner being targeted with false violations. The attorney used your case as precedent. Apparently, word has gotten around in the legal community about how a professional survey shut down an HOA president's bogus claims. You might have set a precedent here. That is good, I guess. Hopefully, it helps other people avoid what I went through. I think it will. HOAs are getting more careful about filing violations without proper evidence. They know homeowners are willing to fight back now. After that call, I felt a sense of closure that I had not quite achieved even after the court case. What had started as a frustrating violation notice had turned into something bigger. A reminder that individuals could push back against petty bureaucratic tyranny if they were willing to do the work and stand their ground. The following spring, almost exactly a year after the original violation notice had appeared on my door, Susan Walsh announced that the HOA board was updating all of the community covenants and regulations. They were clarifying ambiguous language, removing outdated rules, and implementing new oversight procedures to prevent abuse of authority. A committee of homeowners was formed to review the changes, and I was asked to serve on it. I accepted, figuring that if I was going to live in an HOA community, I might as well help make it function better. The committee met once a week for 2 months, going through every section of the covenants line by line. We fixed the fence height language to make it crystal clear that backyard privacy fences could be up to 72 inches with no exceptions or interpretive ambiguity. We added provisions requiring photographic evidence for all violation notices. We established an independent appeals process that did not require waiting weeks for a board meeting. The revised covenants were presented to the full community for a vote in May, and they passed with 87% approval. It felt like a real accomplishment, turning my negative experience into positive change that would benefit everyone in Meadowbrook Estates. Around that same time, I started dating a woman named Diana Vasquez who lived a few neighborhoods over in Gilbert. She was a nurse at Banner Desert Medical Center, and we met at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue. On our third date, I told her the whole fence saga, expecting her to think I was crazy for fighting an HOA over 6 inches of fence height. Instead, she laughed and said, "Good for you." I cannot stand people who abuse tiny amounts of power. My last HOA tried to fine me for having a wreath on my door that was not pre-approved. A wreath. I fought them on it too. Did you win? Eventually. But I did not have security camera footage of the HOA president committing crimes, so your story is way better. That made me laugh, and I realized I could finally see the humor in the situation. At the time, it had been stressful and infuriating and expensive. But looking back, there was something absurdly funny about the whole thing. A grown woman sneaking around at 2 in the morning with a reciprocating saw to cut down fence panels because she lost an argument at a meeting. Diana and I kept dating, and she moved in with me that fall. She loved the house and the neighborhood, and she especially appreciated the 6-foot privacy fence in the backyard. We adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Cooper who loved to run around the enclosed yard without any risk of escaping. Life moved on. The fence became just a fence again, not a symbol of bureaucratic warfare or personal vindication. It did its job, providing privacy and security, standing exactly 6 feet tall just as it had been designed to do. I did occasionally think about Patricia Hendricks and wonder what had driven her to such extremes. Was it really about the fence, or was it about something deeper? A need for control, a fear of being questioned, an inability to admit mistakes. I would never know, and ultimately it did not matter. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The lesson I took away from the whole experience was simple but important. When you know you are right, when you have the facts on your side, it is worth standing up for yourself even when it is difficult and expensive and stressful. Bullies, whether they are schoolyard thugs or HOA presidents, rely on people being too tired or too scared or too busy to fight back. Most of the time, they get away with it. But sometimes, someone has the time and the resources and the sheer stubborn determination to say no, to demand accountability, to insist on facts over arbitrary authority. I was glad I had been that someone, even though I never wanted to be. I was glad I had spent the money on the survey and the security cameras and the repairs. I was glad I had gone to the meetings and filed the appeals and testified in court. Because in the end, it was not really about the fence at all. It was about the principle that you should not have to accept injustice just because fighting it is inconvenient. My fence stood 6 feet tall, exactly within code requirements, just as it always had been. And I slept well at night knowing I had defended not just my property, but my dignity and my rights as a homeowner. That was worth more than any amount of money or hassle. Tom still joked about it sometimes when we had backyard barbecues. He would tap the fence and say, "Still 6 feet tall, right? We should measure it again just to be sure." And we would laugh because the whole thing had become a running joke in the neighborhood, a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of documentation. But underneath the humor, there was real meaning. People in Meadowbrook Estates felt more empowered now. They questioned violation notices instead of automatically paying fines. They attended board meetings and asked tough questions. They held their elected representatives accountable. My fight with Patricia had changed the culture of the community in small but significant ways. Years later, when people asked me about the experience, I always told them the same thing. Know your rights. Document everything. Do not back down when you are right. And if someone in authority is abusing their power, shine a light on it because sunlight is the best disinfectant. My 6-foot fence, standing proud and legal in my backyard in Gilbert, Arizona, was a testament to those principles. It was not just a fence. It was a monument to the idea that ordinary people could stand up to petty tyrants and win, as long as they were willing to do the work and refuse to be intimidated. And every time I looked at it, I smiled, because I knew exactly how tall it was. 6 feet, exactly within code requirements. Just as it had always been.